You are now tuning in to the COR Focus Podcast.
Hi everyone, my name is Alyssa Simmons. I'm your host. Joined with me I have my co-host Ryan Wright and our special guest, Dr. Miatta. So today for our special edition of the COR Focus Podcast, we are focusing in on the topic of mental wellness. So before we get started, we would just like you to introduce yourself, tell us about your profession, what you do, how you grew your passion for mental wellness.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, I want to say thank you to both yourself, Alyssa, and Ryan for the invitation. I'm so glad to be here, very honored to be here, and very honored to be your guest this afternoon. I am a licensed clinical psychologist, and I've been working with the veteran community, as a matter of fact, for about 17 years, but I work with adults primarily, and before working with the veteran community, I was in private practice for a while, so I've really had the opportunity to work across ethnic scopes, ages, combat, non-combat experiences. So primarily my experience has been a great deal with post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, insomnia, sleep deprivation, and a wide range of experiences that a lot of the veterans in our community have experienced.
Wow. Can I ask, when you started working with veterans, what was that like? What was the shift in, you were working with just regular adults, and now you're working with veterans. What was that shift like? Yeah, no, Ryan, it's a good question. I think the main shift, if I can be very, very honest, is that veterans oftentimes come with, a plethora of mental health diagnoses, whereas with the regular civilian community, I would work with individuals with maybe anxiety, and that would be all they presented with, or depression, that would be all they presented with, or substance abuse, and that would be all, or what we call a psychosocial stressor, which are events that people are experiencing, and they just kind of find that they are, weighted down with those experiences. Whereas with the veteran community in particular, I could work with one individual who had post-traumatic stress, who had substance abuse concerns, they weren't sleeping very well, they had experienced domestic violence, and also had combat experience. So all of those things were combined with just working with one individual. So I saw a lot more complicated and complex PTSD sometimes, and just a number of experiences all in one person. Wow. That's awesome. Yeah.
So when you were working across the board with various different groups of people, what is a common misconception that you often heard about mental health or mental illness?
Good question. And that's a question that a lot of people are inquiring about right now. I think one of the most common misconceptions is that you have to have a major diagnosis. You have to have trauma, or you have to have been abused, or you have to have had a major or significant life experience in order to benefit from mental health or benefit from a mental health professional. And that is not the case. I even reflect, if I can really be honest, I reflect on biblical characters. These are real men and women who lived and walked the earth before we. And, one of the people that I think about is Moses, who had the opportunity to talk to his father-in-law. He sought counsel from his father-in-law. And we know that Ruth sought counsel from her mother-in-law. And Esther from her uncle. So the human experience as God created us is not one of isolation and alienation. It is one that enables us to reach out and ask for help when we need it. So one of the most common misconceptions is that you have to wait, or you have to be in really, really bad shape in order to seek out assistance, and that isn't true. Right.
So what are ways that we can ensure that we are in tune with our own mental well-being?
A lot of different ways. And I think, I like that you asked that question, Ryan, because one of the first and foremost ways is to be aware. Self-awareness is one of the things that I, in particular, as a mental health provider, I also have the opportunity. I'm the director of a program called Outside the Wire, where we work with the veteran community who are in academia, and and oftentimes I'm working with veterans who are recently discharged from the military, And so they're still used to the camaraderie of being in the military. Although they're younger, they're still used to being and spending time with their brothers and sisters at arms. And now suddenly they're in a new environment where it does seem a little bit more isolated and a little bit more alienated. And that can pose a significant challenge. So one of the things that I oftentimes like to share with them, to answer your question, is self-awareness.
Right.
And acknowledging, I'm not doing well right now.
Right.
And really trying to explore what might be going on. For many of them, I feel alone. I miss
Right.
my brothers and my sisters. Okay, well then there might be the reason for depression because I'm feeling alienated. I'm feeling isolated. I don't get this civilian world. And so when I look at even civilians now, not just the veteran community, but civilians in general, it's important to have an acknowledgement of oneself. How am I? So every now and then, it's all right to take a deep breath, to be silent, to be quiet. And I know you all are young people, and I know we're addressing young people.
Yeah.
Social media and cell phones and Facebook and all of these different forms of communication, they're excellent. However, from time to time, it is all right and advisable, in fact, to sit quietly, to self-examine, even in prayer, but to sit quietly and self-examine, how am I? How is the news impacting me?
Right.
In answering those questions. Right. How is social media? I'm on it for the last 4 or 5 hours. I've been on it and I've not taken a break. How is that impacting me? Sitting quietly and answering that question. That helps to build self-insight and awareness, where you're able to recognize before it becomes problematic what's going on internally, what's going on with me. How am I feeling today? Where and how are my thoughts? So we call that awareness. We call that self-insight. And that would be one of the things that I would encourage, Ryan, for anyone who's listening, even if it's 30 minutes out of the day,
Right.
just to take a deep breath, to sit quietly, turn the phone off, turn the television off, self-examine, and really ask yourself those kinds of questions that oftentimes we don't get an opportunity to ask because the world around us is so active. It's so busy. There's so many demands. You're in school, you've got jobs, you've got social media that you've got to keep up with, you've got homework assignments, you've got all of these various things.
Right.
And occasionally, it's important just to be silent.
Right. Right. Do you, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Do you think, I just want to touch back to when you were talking about social media. Do you think with just now in the day and age where heavily social media impacted society,
Right.
Do you think there has been a big change in mental well-being in society since social media has become so big?
An insightful question. Speaking of insight, which is sight inwardly, isn't it? So
Right.
It's insight.
Right.
I'm not here to say that social media is all bad. It is not.
Right.
Has a lot of advantages.
Absolutely.
And I think that our technology and the direction that we've gone in has helped us as a society. However, it's also important to recognize that as we are maturing and growing technologically and otherwise, that we also have to grow in morality. We also have to grow in our level of ethical responsibility one to one another, and we also have to grow in terms of our ability to communicate one with another.
Right.
So the positives and the assets and the benefits of social media, I think that's evident. However, to address your question, I do believe that there are a lot of negatives as well, and one of them being one of the things that I've observed, even in my work with young people, because I still do work with young people, of course, and that is sometimes there's an inability or discomfort is a better word, interacting with one another.
Right.
Face to face, directly, having difficult conversations. I've had the opportunity to talk to and to give some advice to young people, and and one that comes to mind is feeling uncomfortable approaching a girl or feeling uncomfortable around other people.
Right.
And one of the things that I shared with this young man is those are natural, normal emotional experiences.
Right.
That's natural anxiety.
Right.
It's natural to feel nervous in an environment where you don't know people. You don't know if they're going to judge you well or not well. You don't know if they're going to like you at this particular age. You want to be liked. Human beings, we want to be liked. We want to be appreciated. We want to be
Right.
loved. That's natural. That's normal. Social media has given some people, a false sense of comfort because I can break up on Twitter, or I can break up with someone by sending them a text,
Right.
or I can have a very difficult conversation with them and then I'm done with it.
Right.
Where I don't have to have this eye-to-eye, face-to-face, in your presence conversation because it makes me feel uncomfortable.
Right.
So we've lost, and I think younger people, not all, but sometimes there's a lack of that comfort having difficult conversations like this because I'm used to doing it like this,
Yeah.
and then
Right.
I'm done with it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So I
Definitely.
think social media has created a new environment and a new way of communicating that is not as healthy.
Okay.
And doesn't benefit the one-on-one, face-to-face
Yeah.
that is necessary for developmental growth and social growth and all of the other different forms of growth that are necessary for adulthood. It is more complicated. I will not lie.
Yeah.
This kind of conversation, especially if it's a difficult one or a disappointing one or I've got bad news to share,
Right.
it is inherently more difficult.
Right.
But it is a part of growth. It's a part of humanity, and it is ultimately a part of what God has given us. And really quickly, if I can add this, if we can imagine what it must have been like for Queen Esther to have that conversation with her husband, the king. She's now been fasting. Her uncle has told her, this is how you go about having this conversation so that the children of Israel can be, can escape being killed and murdered, which was what was going to happen. So she had to go to her husband. And at that time, even though it was her husband, she had to show reverence. And he could have had her killed because she walked into his environment without having been welcomed. So can you imagine how nervous she must have been? Can you
Yes.
imagine how scared she
You're
was
right.
to have this face-to-face conversation and say, I'm an Israelite, I'm Hebrew, and please don't kill my people. And he could have killed her.
Yeah.
It would have been so much easier just to tweet it out, just to, Facebook or have that conversation. But she had to walk into his environment, in his space. And I think the Bible says that she may have even passed out. She was overcome, but she had that conversation. So the point that I'm making, Ryan and Alyssa, is that, and those who are listening, is that these are difficult conversations to have, but we cannot rely on social media alone to have these kinds of human interactions
Yeah.
and human discussions.
Going back to, thank you for sharing that, of course, but going back to a little while ago, as you are a mental health provider, I think in our society today, there's a lot of stigma around getting help from people, having a therapist,
Yeah.
especially in our community. I think a lot, it's kind of downplayed. So if there is any one of our viewers looking for maybe support, what is something you encourage for those looking for a mental health provider?
Right. Yeah, I mean, if I could sum up, I guess, a response and not take up all day because it's such, an amazingly important question that you're asking, I would say, and there's really no other way to say it aside from encouraging boldness. There's this, phrase that I read a long time ago, and I really, really like it, and it says, courage is not the absence of fear. Instead, it is the mindset, or it is the belief that there's something greater than the fear. So to be courageous does not mean that you're not going to experience emotional fear.
Right.
Fear is a common, natural, normal human emotion.
Right.
Even Christ experienced emotions. So I would say be bold, be courageous, and know that having feelings of fear or trepidation or feeling a little nervous or feeling a little judged,
Right.
those are human experiences that it's all right, even though you feel them, to embrace them and be courageous and be bold. What do I mean by that? ask for help. Acknowledge that I can't do this alone and that it's all right, even though my environment may tell me that it's taboo. Identify someone, or at least 2 or 3 people that you believe will have your back, even if you are unsure. Identify those people now. Who are those people? They may be my best friend, my cousin, my mother, my father, maybe a neighbor or a friend in school. Identify at least 2 or 3 people, even before you need them, that you know that you can trust enough to say, hey, I'm having a hard time, and they won't judge you. Because if you wait until the moment where you're feeling an intensity of emotions, you're less likely to reach out and ask for help, because you're going to be overcome with, I'm fearful that they're going to judge me. They're going to think I'm weak. They're going to think I'm not strong. They're going to think all of these things. Whereas if you think about it before you get into that situation, you will have already planned out who's my safety net and who can I go to. So be bold, be courageous. Know that it is all right. Take it from me. I've been working with people for a very long time. I've shared with you even biblical references, and those who don't necessarily take the Bible, it's all right. Think about family members who are older than you, generations before us. We've never had to walk this walk of life alone. We've always, different generations. And as you mentioned, Alyssa, sometimes individuals of diverse backgrounds and minority backgrounds, African American, Latino Americans, or Latinx, and various minority groups, oftentimes because resources were not available. And we had to rely on one another. Now there are resources that are available. So going back to this idea of being bold and being courageous, and then allow yourself to be that approachable person. Should a friend come to me and say, I need help, or I'm having a hard time, that you're going to be that person that says, it's all right. I don't know the answers. I don't know what to do, but I'm all right with you having come to me. And identify that I'm going to be that person that someone can come to.
Right.
Changing the narrative around mental health is essentially what I'm saying.
Yes. Us as young people, how do you think if we do have someone that's seeking help and maybe they don't want to go to a mental health provider, how can we as young people help our peers that are dealing with mental health stressors or mental illnesses?
Yeah, well, as a peer, I think that is one of the strongest benefits and strongest assets of this idea of us being social beings and communal beings. You think about Christ, and he had disciples. He had a support system. He had people that he could go to. I mean, think about him being in the Garden of Gethsemane and getting ready to lay down his life, and he knew what was before him. And he said, hey, pardon the language, boys, I need your help. I need you to have my back. I need you to pray with me. And he had to go and he had to pray in the Garden of Gethsemane. And then he came back and found his boys were sleeping. Could you not pray with me for an hour? I need you. And so having that strong support system, one of the things that I would say to young people, even as I mentioned, being that person that it's all right to come to and making that decision, would be knowing the resources that are around you, and then being willing to say, I will go with you. Your peers are a strong asset. I will go with you. I will call the number for you. There is even a crisis hotline number. It's 1-800-273-TALK, T-A-L-K. I think it's 8255, but it's TALK. You can call that number, press option number 1 if there is an emergency or a crisis. And you can call that with a friend or with a buddy and say, hey, I'm going to be right there with you. If you want to go to a clinic or a hospital, I'll go there with you. Or I'm going to go to the church with you. There are oftentimes at many churches, there are counselors that are available. Point is, as a peer, as a young person, I'll go with you. because you know that peer support is very important at your age. You know that having that social support, that's what social media strength is, having support and being able to communicate all day long, 24 hours a day, and, and not having to worry about it being midnight or 1 o'clock. I can still text someone
Right.
and, get on social
Right.
media. That's a part of the strength and the beauty of your age. We've all been there. At my age, we had phones. Not telling my age, but we did have the phones where you could, touch, and it was a landline. And, and you would talk to your friends, and you had that social support. So that's consistent throughout the generations. Take advantage of that support. But you've got to know what your role is if you're going to be that person. Know that it's going to be okay. Know that I'm going to be courageous, and I'm going to encourage him or her to be courageous. Know that I'm going to have these resources. I'm going to write that number down that Dr. Miatta just gave. I'm going to put it in my cell phone. I'm going to identify other resources in my community that will uphold the sanctity of anonymity and confidentiality. They will not share that information unless you give them that clearance. And knowing what are the steps that I'm going to take. Again, being prepared is a part of what I want to encourage you all to do with your friends. And one last thing, many of you know your friends who are more prone to depression. You know the friends who are having difficulties at home. You know the friends who are having difficulties with self-image in their body, and you know those friends. So being prepared for that time, again, ahead of time, so that you're not waiting until that emergent moment where you have to be impulsive and I don't know what to do. Instead, you have time and you have options because you thought about it beforehand. Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely.
So that's what I want to encourage of the listeners.
Yes, thank you.
Thank
For
you.
that.
Yes. So, just going forward, what can we do as a society to ensure that, mental health and mental illness, people with mental health and mental illnesses, that doesn't get stigmatized in our society? What can we do to ensure that?
Right. I think one of the things is what you all are doing today. I mean, look at this beautiful T-shirt that you all have given me. Look at this beautiful T-shirt. Look at my T-shirt. I love it. And that Alyssa's wearing. I mean, this helps to get the word out.
Right.
Now someone walks past and they're reading your shirt that says, wealth is mental health. Now they're thinking about mental health. You're normalizing this conversation. You're normalizing this dialogue, and you being the face of youth, and you being the face of youth, and me being not necessarily the face of youth, but at least, can I say vibrancy? Can I say I'm vibrant?
Yes.
But we become that face of mental health
Right.
communication in the community and in the society, and not being afraid to have these kinds of dialogues, and not being afraid, again, to be bold. Think about it beforehand. Well, what does it look like to be bold? Well, I mean, if you've ever talked to a mental health provider, or if you've ever talked, even if it's not been a professional like myself, if you've ever sought advice from someone, if you've ever experienced being alone, if you've ever been impacted by someone who has died by suicide, if you've ever been touched by that, not being afraid to say, when my friend or my loved one died by suicide, I was crushed. I was sad. That's what depression is. It's chronic sadness.
Yeah.
Human beings experience sadness.
Yeah.
Right.
Nothing new, nothing unusual, nothing weird, nothing weak, nothing about that. Long-term sadness over time, when it starts to become debilitating, when it starts to impact functioning, is when people like myself, psychologists, will say depression in order to be able to treat it. But at its foundation, it's sadness.
Right.
And human beings experience that. So if you've ever been impacted by anything, or if you've ever experienced anxiety or feeling a little nervousness, we call it butterflies. Have you ever had butterflies in your stomach?
Yeah.
Definitely.
Of course.
Of course.
It's human. It's human nature to experience butterflies. We call it anxiety, but we give it a diagnosis when it starts to interfere and interrupt a person's ability to function. Otherwise, it's human nature. So when you're talking about normalizing mental health, normalizing these discussions so that it doesn't seem and feel so taboo and the stereotype is not as impactful, it means having dialogues about it, And then knowing where you stand with regard to this dialogue. Here's what I mean. Well, where do I stand? I stand where mental health doesn't have to be taboo.
Mm-hmm.
Mental health is just chronic sadness that's not been dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
Chronic anxiety that has not been dealt with. I talked to a psychologist. She's a licensed clinical psychologist. She can speak on that matter. That's what the research shows us. That's what my experience shows. That is what it is. Trauma. There's at least 65% of men in our society have experienced some kind of trauma. Does not mean they're going to then develop symptoms of post-traumatic stress,
Right.
but have experienced some kind of trauma. So what does that mean? It means that majority of the population have been exposed to some kind of trauma, but if there is not an intervention, if there's not support, if it's not been properly dealt with, then it can go on to develop symptoms of what we call post-traumatic stress. We've got law enforcement officers, we have firewomen, firemen, we've got military personnel, we've got certain kinds of professions that lend themselves to greater experiences of trauma. But if we're not talking about it, if we're not normalizing this and putting it within the context of the human experience that has not been properly dealt with, then we're likely to think, oh, it's taboo.
Right.
Oh, you're weak. It's
Right.
weird.
Right.
It's a bad thing. When in actuality, it's not. These are human experiences. But if we don't deal with them, then they can become more problematic or they interfere with a person's ability
Right.
to function. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Definitely.
Well, I think that was actually our last question.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else to add to tell our audience or anything?
Yes, I would say this. I would say that, again, if you look at and if you really think about, and this may seem like a ridiculous question. Am I older than you all? See, I'm looking at your faces. You're like, duh. Yeah, I know. It seems like a ridiculous question. Am I older than you all?
Yes.
Okay, you almost seem like you're unsure. I mean, yes, of course I'm older than you. I'm much older than you all. Do I have elders who are older than I am?
Of
Yes.
course.
And do they have elders who, even though they're deceased now, were older than they were?
Absolutely.
And we can go on generation after generation after generation after generation. And there are experiences that we as human beings all have to have on this side of life. And it almost seems and appears that just as soon as you think you've got, a lot of knowledge and wellness and, God calls you home. But the point is this. We all have trials that we have to go through in life experiences. And every generation before us, before me, before them, experienced difficulties, hardships, moments when they were alone, moments when they were confused and they were uncertain, moments when they actually felt that God abandoned them, moments when they did not feel that they had any other options, moments when they could have succumbed to this idea of what we call nowadays suicide, death by suicide. They could have succumbed to that. And what we don't say enough is that many of these experiences and these emotions that I just talked to you about that are human, natural human emotions before they become problematic, feelings of fear, anxiety, uncertainty, embarrassment, shame, those are feelings, emotions that are informing us of something that we have to examine. We have to pay attention to. They're natural, they're normal. But in the current society, unfortunately, Ryan and Alyssa, sometimes young people feel as if they're the only ones experiencing these feelings because they are as old as they've ever been. That's why I started out with this idea of, am I older than you? You are as old as you've ever been.
Right.
So you think that what you are experiencing is all that there is and that, no one has experienced them before you. And I promise you, others have experienced emotional pain before you and they got through it. And so I'm here to say that even though it feels like I'm the only person alive who's experienced hurt and pain and someone bullying you or someone not hearing you or not liking you or a boy dropping you or a girl dropping you or whatever it is that you may be experiencing where you feel alone and you feel like there's no one else, I'm here to say you are not alone. And generations before you experienced it. And you have within you what it takes to get through it, but you don't have to do it alone. That's the mistake that many young people make. They try to do it alone. And then that leads them to feelings of, well, other people did it. They died by suicide. I guess that means that's my only way out. It is not. Ask for help. Be bold. Be courageous. And know that people care about you. And know that here it is, on the weekend. You're here on the weekend. I'm here on the weekend. We're all here on the weekend. And we could be relaxing or doing any number of things. We're here because you are important, because we care about you. Taping this today because you all cared enough to think about this conversation. And I appreciate the invitation to say that your life has meaning and purpose, even though you don't know what the ultimate outcome that God has for you is. You're younger than I am. I'm younger than others. Others are younger than others before them. And you all are older than others as well. Right. So the point that I'm making, Alyssa and Ryan and others, is right now you may think that you've got the fullness of the knowledge and awareness that your life experience can provide to you. But there are things that you don't know, and you are here for a reason. Stick it out. Don't give up. Talk to someone. Know that mental health is nothing different than going to the gym. Have you all ever been to the gym? Have you tried to eat well? The alkaline. You try to. You do the best that you can, of course.
Exactly.
Trying to drink alkaline water, trying to eat fruits and vegetables, you splurge every now and then. We all do. But the point is, you're trying to lead a healthy life. Mental health is no different than physical health, spiritual health, social health. You've got to work at it.
Exactly.
Got to do some things.
Exactly.
So I would say, as we end and wrap it up, don't give up. And know that there are people that care about you, and that there are others who've gone before you that have experienced the same difficulties that you may be thinking, it's time for me to give up and take my own life. Please don't do it. And know that you are loved. And I think, again, I just want to say thank you for the questions and thank you for the invitation. I'm honored to have been here, and I hope that anything or something that I've said has been helpful.
Yes, thank you so much again.
Yeah, it's been an honor to have you here. Yes, open up this dialogue. Open up this dialogue. It's going to touch many lives. It's going to touch many lives more than we know. It's definitely important that we continue to have conversations like these because we don't know what people are going through. We don't know. So we sincerely thank you for coming here today, speaking with us. We really do.
It's my pleasure,
Thank
Ryan.
you so much. So,
my pleasure,
again,
Alyssa.
that was Dr. Miatta. We thank you all for tuning in to our special edition of the Core Focus podcast. Be sure to tune in for our next special edition episode where we focus in on another topic. Bye, everyone.
Have a good one.
Bye. Stay well.